So here's one of those reviews where it is probably 99% positive that you can't see this movie by the time you hear this. But I'm going to do it anyway because I saw a flick, and if you were curious, I got an opinion on it. So I went to see the very, very limited release of George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, the original 1978 Dawn of the Dead, in the theater in 3D. It was a very limited release as I record this Halloween weekend 2022. Richard Rubinstein, the producer of Dawn of the Dead, the rights holder for Dawn of the Dead, has spent many, many years and many, many dollars having this film that was shot flat, was not shot in 3D, electronically, digitally, whatever you want to call it, converted to 3D, which was done recently, again, as I record this, to Jaws. There was a version of Jaws in 3D that I saw, and it was actually really well done. Now, does it make the movie better? Absolutely not. The movie is what the movie is going to be. But if you take an older movie, and you've probably heard me say this before about 3D, if you take an older movie where there are more wide shots, the camera is stable, the shots last longer, the shots are better composed, things are in focus, you can convert that to 3D very successfully. The problem with most 3D is that it's slapped onto movies that were not shot with the idea of them being in 3D with modern techniques, where your brain and your eye cannot focus on any image long enough to process the 3D effect. It's everything is fleeting because everything is cut so fast and so shaky. So applying it to a film from the 70s or earlier, I want to say The Wizard of Oz is getting one of these 3D treatments, if it hasn't already. It makes more sense to me. So I went to see the Living Viewmaster version of Dawn of the Dead at Regal Cinemas, which I think was the exclusive purveyor of this Halloween 2022. And here are my thoughts. So have you seen Dawn of the Dead? Do you know Dawn of the Dead? I guess I should say, if you've not seen Dawn of the Dead, I'll give you, if you've seen it, this is going to seem really lame. If you've not seen Dawn of the Dead, here's a tiny little thing about what this movie's about. So George Romero made this movie called Night of the Living Dead in 1968, and it was a big deal. But due to various things, he never really made any money on it. So a decade later, he got back and recorded. He created a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Now, it takes place in that same world where zombies are, proliferating around the world, around the country, and it's this group of people. It's a woman who runs a TV news program, and a guy who runs the helicopter for the TV station, and two SWAT team guys. They hop in a helicopter when everything's going down, and they flee to try to find a place where the zombie outbreak isn't as bad and people aren't going as crazy, that they can just sort of live and survive and see how long they last. And what they wind up doing is landing at one of those new shopping malls, which actually technically, I guess, were kind of new in the late 70s. And it's the zombies in a mall movie. So they basically hole up in a shopping mall, and there's zombies everywhere. They manage to contain that. And then what kind of life do they live in a shopping mall? So it's one of the greatest horror films of all time, one of the greatest horror movies of the 70s, certainly, and a movie that just lives on, much like a zombie. It lives on forever. It just keeps going and going and going. So 3D. You don't need me to tell you if this movie's good or not. It's great. It's great. The 3D. At times, I've noticed the 3D. See, for me, the whole thing with 3D is I want to know that I'm watching 3D. Now, that doesn't always mean that. It just means you can see depth. You can see various planes of depth. You get the effect. And if I'm watching a 3D movie and I keep having to go, is that in 3D? Then it's kind of pointless for what is almost always extra fee that you pay to see these things. So I did notice the effect at times. There are times where there's a little bit of a coming at you. Usually it's if somebody breaks a window toward the camera and the glass shoots out, you can sort of see that coming at you. There's at least one shot of somebody in the background shooting somebody in the foreground, a zombie, and there's brain explosion or something. Sometimes that comes at you, but it's fast because he didn't hold on those shots originally. There are moments where you do see a good amount of depth. Unfortunately, with most 3D movies, I feel like the greatest sense of depth is when the credits are rolling. So the opening titles, you're like, ooh, it looks like the action is behind those. And the end credits, it's like, ooh, it looks like those titles are off the screen or closer to me than what's in the background. I didn't really get a huge amount of 3D out of this. I do think it was well done, but it just wasn't... Ultimately, it wasn't necessary. One idea with putting something in 3D is that it could make something feel more immediate. It's like the idea of surround sound. It makes you feel like you're in that environment. Now, if 3D would would do that as well. That's cool. That puts you one step closer to be able to be in that mall with those characters, and makes the action and the drama and the intensity of the moment seem more immediate, like you're there. I kept feeling like, is it in 3D? Like, I kept doing that with my glasses to see how much of a double image it was. And yes, obviously it was in 3D the whole time, but it didn't really jump out at me literally or figuratively as really having a strong 3D effect. And for some people that's good, for some it's not. The bottom line is that this allowed people in big shopping centers and strip malls and multiplexes in this country to see Dawn of the Dead on the big screen again. For the longest time, the producer has been really strict about not allowing anybody to screen Dawn of the Dead. And it was always a mystifying decision to me, because this is this uber classic movie. People would love to see it. Theaters would love to run it. Why aren't you letting anybody play it? This doesn't make any sense. I think part of it was that he was spending years trying to get this version done and have that be a big success and like an exclusive screening. And it's been this thing we've seen for, it was kind of common back in the later 90s, early to mid 2000s too, where the only way any studio would re-release a movie is if it was in 3D. It's like Disney was like, it's Beauty and the Beast, but now it's in 3D. Or we're going to re-release The Exorcist, but it's the version you've never seen. Or, you know, we're putting in extra bits, the Star Wars special editions. And I've always said, a good movie is a good movie. You don't have to change it to make people want to go see it on the big screen. Jaws plays damn near every week somewhere in this country, and people go to see it. It wouldn't play as often as it does if people didn't go see it. Putting it in 3D doesn't really make that much of a difference. Yes, it might get some people to go see it because it's a way you can't watch it at home, and I think that's the idea. But in the end, the movie is the movie. So if putting Dawn of the Dead in 3D got new people to see it for the first time who maybe never had the chance or interest because it's Halloween weekend and people are more susceptible to want to see horror around Halloween time, or if they went out to see it because it was some new to them movie in 3D, that's cool. But for me, it was just a way to see Dawn of the Dead with really good sound on a giant screen looking great, because you have to restore these things to do a proper 3D conversion. So it was worth it for me to see it. Part of me doing this is to say, if you missed it, you missed seeing Dawn of the Dead in the theater. I don't think you missed a mind-blowing 3D experience, because I barely noticed the 3D most of the time. Maybe my eyes are bad. I think they are. You do notice that I wear glasses, but sometimes I'll watch movies that are converted to 3D and I'll just feel like, is the effect on? Like I have to like look again and say, is it in 3D? Okay, I guess it is, because I guess it looks like it's set back from the frame. Anyway, Dawn of the Dead, 1978 or 79, is a very good movie. I would highly recommend seeing it however you can. If somehow you see this and it's still playing in 3D somewhere, go see it in 3D. It'll be a little bit cool because it's 3D, and in the end, it's still Dawn of the Dead.